Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 17 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's episode, we're going to talk about players whose value has decreased post-NFL draft. So last week we talked about players whose value had increased. Today we're doing the opposite. I have 3 players lined up at each position that I want to talk about, run through, give you some alternate players to target that are in their similar tier, and hopefully give you something to listen to on your drive home from up north. Happy Memorial Day to you all out there. Hope you had a good weekend. And if you're not driving home from something fun for the weekend, we appreciate you still for tuning in, and hopefully we can give you some interesting thoughts on some guys whose value has dropped off, at least in my mind, since the NFL draft. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, as always, you can find us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, you name it. We're out there. Go give us a follow, leave us a 5-star review, and follow us on Twitter as well, at Dynasty War Room, and then go give us a subscribe to us on YouTube at Dynasty War Room as well. That helps us out as we try to grow on that platform as well. So with all that being said, let's just jump right into it. Like I said, we have 3 players at each position that I want to talk about. We'll start at QB. And the first one, and I've tried to keep all this just as an aside to somewhat bigger names. I don't want to go too far down the list, so these are all going to be every player listed, with the exception of maybe one of the tight ends, will be a truly fantasy relevant asset in a Superflex Dynasty league. So we'll start with QB, where I'm going to start off with Aaron Rodgers, who is somebody that is coming off of an injury, and I think a lot of people expected the Jets to help him out a little bit more in the draft from a weapons standpoint. They helped him at offensive line, which is great, but no Brock Bowers, no first round wide receiver. It was, Malachi Corley was really the only guy added, and I'm just not in love with Corley as a prospect. I don't know that he is going to add enough to this offense to where I am excited about Aaron Rodgers, especially factoring in the injury, with the Achilles and the age. I mean, this is a guy that has been playing for a really long time, and I just don't really see Aaron Rodgers being anything even remotely close to what we saw in Green Bay. And so I think we're talking about, a very, bottom level quarterback 2, which has its purposes. Certainly in Superflex, having those quarterback 2s is important. But this is not somebody that I'm really that comfortable with going into the season as my QB2. He's someone that I would be looking to have as a QB3 on my team, especially as a contender. If you're a rebuilding team, you should have traded Aaron Rodgers a long time ago. If you have not already, you should do that soon, because if he does not play well to start the season, his value is going to plummet. So this is something where I'm excited to have Garrett Wilson, thrilled to have Breece Hall, but I'm not that excited about Mike Williams, and I'm just not really excited about anything else passing game wise for the Jets. Tyler Conklin can be a little sleeper pick at tight end to come off the bench or something, but nothing really there excites me for Aaron Rodgers. So that's why he's number 1 on this list for players whose value have decreased post NFL draft. Number 2 on this list is Derek Carr of the New Orleans Saints. And Carr is somebody that I think has always sort of just been this classic mediocre QB2 that has little upside. And I think that is still the case. But now there's actually starting to be a little bit more of a threat that he doesn't have much of a future. And I say that because, not because of the team took a quarterback in the first or second or third round of the draft. They ended up with Spencer Rattler in the later rounds, which ordinarily, a 5th, 6th round quarterback is not going to do much in my mind in terms of fantasy for a starting quarterback, and it won't at the beginning of the year. This is not something where I'm expecting Spencer Rattler to come in and, take over the job in week 4 or something like that. That's certainly not the case. However, I think it does signal us that the team itself is kind of preparing some alternate possibilities in case he does struggle late in the season and this team is out of the playoff mix. they're probably not quite bad enough to secure a top 5 pick, but they're also probably not going to be good enough to make the playoffs. And so a team like the Saints that is really in a very difficult salary cap situation, they might hope that somebody like Rattler, a late round pick, can step in and, make some noise and show that he could be a bridge QB at a minimum or something for a season if Carr, continues to really struggle. I mean, let's just face it, he's not. Who's excited about having Derek Carr as their QB2 on a dynasty team? I don't really think anybody is. I think he's somebody that, is serviceable, similar to the Aaron Rodgers argument that, those guys in that late QB2 range are important, but I don't know that I would be excited to have him on my roster. And there's also Jake Haener, too, from last year. So that's back-to-back years that New Orleans has taken a backup quarterback in the draft. And I don't see the upside anymore with Derek Carr. So I would be looking to move on from him, especially if I'm a rebuilding team. Again, like Rodgers, I probably would have moved him already. But this is something where if I'm a contender, I'm really only comfortable with him as a QB3. I'm not looking to try to start him every week. And they didn't do a lot in terms of the draft to sort of help Derek Carr out. There's, Chris Olave is awesome. He's going to be a great player, but they didn't really add anybody who I think can be wide receiver 2 in this offense. Bub Means in the later rounds, but it's going to be Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave, I think, are really the two guys, unless A.T. Perry has a big breakout. So Derek Carr, number 2 on this list of somebody that I just am not that excited about, and in my eyes, since the draft has declined. Third at the quarterback position is somebody that I think a lot of people are very excited about, and I don't want this to fool you into thinking that I don't like this player or don't think that he's a valuable asset, because he is. But following the NFL draft, there's no player that, in my mind, saw kind of a bigger value hit at the quarterback position than Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins signed a 4-year deal with Atlanta to be their starting quarterback, got a bunch of money, but then Atlanta went out and took Michael Penix Jr. in the top 10 of the NFL draft. There is no way that this helps Kirk Cousins in terms of his dynasty value. There just isn't. Do I think he's going to be great and, that he's going to really help out guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, and that this offense should be significantly improved? Yes, I think that's all true. But Penix is someone that is going to cap Kirk Cousins' long-term upside. There simply is a very small chance that Cousins is on this team in 3 years, let alone 4. We're talking about probably 2 years, given the guarantee structure of his contract, and then it's going to be a shift over to Michael Penix Jr. And this is also a player where we kind of forget, but like Aaron Rodgers is coming off that Achilles injury. So, this is a lot of just hoping and expecting that his health will be there and that he's going to come back and pick up right where he left off. That's not a guarantee, especially with something like an Achilles injury. So, if you are a Kirk Cousins manager, if you are able or have already done so in a rookie draft, have had a second-round pick to be able to pick up Michael Penix Jr., I think that's a good strategy to cover you a little bit there. But this is something where I think Kirk Cousins will be a very solid QB2, a top half of QB2. I think we're talking probably in that 12 to 14 type of range for fantasy this upcoming season. So he'll be a very, solid startable asset in Superflex leagues, and he'll have QB1 weeks. But this is not someone that you should be thinking, hey, I have a starting quarterback for the next 4 years. I think you got 2 years at most, and then it's going to be the Michael Penix show. So that's why Cousins, another player whose value has decreased post-NFL draft. Moving on over to running back. 3 players that I think are even more high profile than the quarterbacks I just talked about in terms of where they rank within their position. And I'm going to start with 2 guys that are consensus, top 10 running backs right now. They're both in the top 10 and keep trade cut in terms of their dynasty value at the position. And Devon Achane is number 1 on this list because of a few different reasons, but largely if we're talking in terms of since the draft, they took Jalen Wright. The Miami Dolphins took Jalen Wright in the 4th round. explosive running back who is going to get work in this offense. This is not just going to be the Devon Achane show. We saw that last year. Raheem Mostert was still very effective. Now he's getting up there in age and has had some injury issues as well. But there's now 3 players that are going to get touches. Achane struggled with some injuries last year. He is very small. So while he is extremely efficient, very explosive, it's going to be kind of a tough backfield to figure out what you want to do with. Because I don't know necessarily that you're going to be able to start Achane every week, which for somebody that's, running back 7 on Keep Trade Cut, that's somebody that you should expect to have in your lineup every single week, barring injury. And while I think you certainly will have him in your lineup to start the year if he's on your team, I don't know that this is a situation where I'm feeling super comfortable about it, just being a week in, week out starter. So there are still injury concerns. I do think that this is probably going to turn into something where Achane and Wright are in a committee starting in 2025. Wright may take a little bit of time to work into the mix. And Achane is not somebody that I'm saying you should, just be getting rid of or selling low or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Very good player. But I think if you wanted to do something like consider a pivot down a tier, I think to someone like a Saquon Barkley or a Kenneth Walker or Jonathan Brooks and pick up a second-round pick on top of that, or, a solid, depth wide receiver or something, something that is going to help your team where you can fill in an extra role in your lineup, add some depth, protect yourself in case of injury, grab a future pick, something along those lines. I think, you should take a look at doing. Now, the age factor is something there if you're going to consider that. He is still very young. So obviously going to someone like Saquon, who's 27, you might want to ask for a little bit more in a deal. But if you wanted to go from just a simple Devon Achane to Jonathan Brooks, I think that there's a tier gap there, and I think that you'd be able to get something, a decent asset on top of Brooks in a deal. So that's just something to consider. Achane is somebody that, had a lot of red flags as a profile, but then, burst onto the scene, and he showed you what he can do. So this isn't just some risk-free move by moving on. But he's somebody that I think at least his value has decreased. So maybe somebody that would have been running back 5 or 6, has fallen a spot or so in general consensus rankings, and I think he's fallen, maybe a couple more in my eyes. But another player that I think is also falling a little bit, and I think we've seen this in sort of the dynasty space in general, that people are getting a little nervous about Kyren Williams, who is currently running back 10 on Keep Trade Cut at the time of this recording. And he declined since the draft because they added Blake Corum. National champion at Michigan, had 100 billion touchdowns last season. I mean, I believe it was 27, but it was like every time you turn around, it was Blake Corum running into the end zone. And he's going to get the ball with the Rams. This is not somebody that the Rams took in the 3rd round just to sit on the bench. Now, certainly I don't think Kyren Williams is going to lose his job. I think this is still Williams, his starting job. But Corum is going to eat into that a little bit. It's going to be, a little bit more of a committee compared to how things were last season, where it was essentially Kyren Williams and nobody else. And, there's been news now this past week about foot injury. So while at this point we don't really know much about that, it seems like it's probably something minor, but we'll have to monitor that as the season gets closer. And Blake Corum is going to be, more than a year removed now from his knee injury. So I would expect that he will be a little bit more explosive than he was his final season at Michigan. So, just something to keep in mind that, hey, Kyren Williams is probably not going to, repeat his 20 points per game, type of fantasy season. So I do think that's baked into his price right now. If you play like best ball on Underdog or something like that, or in terms of you're doing redraft mock drafts this early, I think the market is taking that into account. Even with his dynasty value, I think people are understanding that he's probably not going to have the same role. So I don't know that he's like in a total sell right now, but I do think for the purposes of this show, where we're talking just guys that are not as valuable today as they were a month ago, Kyren Williams certainly fits that mold. Now, the third guy on this list is someone that I'm a big fan of, but, I just have a hard time seeing the ceiling. So, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos, he's somebody that I think was just very hyped as a prospect. Everyone seemed to really love him coming out of North Carolina, and for good reason. I mean, he was a great prospect, but he's had some, pretty major injuries. Last year was first year back from injury, and he was okay, but just, it takes some time for these running backs when they have knee injuries to really regain, full health and full strength and have that explosiveness that we want to see out of the running backs. So at this point, it's now a contract year. It's a crowded backfield. He's the only one in this staff, or only running back in the running back room that this coaching staff did not personally bring in themselves. So that's something to consider. The contract year could end up being a huge motivator. He could have a huge breakout season and just be awesome. That's certainly a possibility. But, they drafted Audric Estime. They have McLaughlin. There's Watson, who they just got as an undrafted free agent from Memphis, who has a little bit of hype right now. Not sure he makes the team, but something to monitor as the summer goes on. Samaje Perine is there. For now, there is a possibility that he gets released. So again, there's some moving parts here because you can't have 5 running backs on the roster if you're Denver. But Javonte Williams has a lot to prove, and he still has some solid value. I think you can certainly get a second-round pick for him. I think that you could trade him for a number of different players sort of in a similar tier, or send Javonte Williams in a third to move up for a player if you are interested in trying to move into an upper tier, but still take on a player with some risk. Again, Javonte Williams is somebody that you could pair with second round pick, to go up and try to get somebody like Devon Achane, which I think is something that could work as well. So he's a guy that is kind of in a make or break year that I think there are reasons to, be skeptical. I just don't think you can just assume that this is going to be a starter for your team. I think you're probably looking at somebody who's an RB3 on your fantasy team with, maybe higher level RB2 upside, and you're hopeful that he can be a solid flex play for you throughout the season. But I don't know that we're ever going to get that running back one, top 10 breakout type of season from Javonte Williams. Moving on over to wide receiver. 3 more guys that are, unlike the running backs, these 3 are a little bit on the older side. And I'm going to start with Deebo Samuel from the 49ers, who is in a very interesting situation there in San Francisco because the team has pretty much made clear through the draft that either Deebo or Brandon Ayuk, or potentially both, will not be back on the team in 2025. Now, all indications are that everyone is still going to be there for this upcoming season, so it's going to be a little bit crowded. But San Francisco drafted Ricky Pearsall at the back of the first round. They took Jacob Cowing later in the draft, and Deebo Samuel's just not someone that I'm looking to invest in right now, whether it's Dynasty, redraft, best ball. I'm just not that interested. He's not somebody that I think has... I just don't know that he's ever going to be what we've seen a couple years ago. I just don't think he has that same level of upside anymore. He's aging. He's had some injury issues. Extremely crowded offense. Lots of different targets. I think that Brandon Ayuk is the clear, true number 1 receiver on this team now. And it wouldn't necessarily shock me that San Francisco moves on from Deebo and does what they can to keep Ayuk. Now, they could certainly move on from both. But again, when you talk about age, injury, added competition through the draft, and the strong possibility that he's going to end up on an offense that won't be as good next year, this is someone whose value is going to just absolutely drop throughout the season, particularly at the end of the season. Once people kind of get what they might feel is their last good season of production from Deebo, you're going to have a really difficult time trading him for anything of value. So I think now is the time, if you can get someone else that has higher ceiling or can still give you a similar level of production. There's a whole bunch of players in his range on Keep Trade Cut that I would rather have. So currently today he's being valued right between Jaden Reed and Keon Coleman, who I would rather have both of those guys, especially given the youth. But I would particularly rather have Keon Coleman than Deebo Samuel. I think you could make that trade 1-for-1. He is ranked ahead of Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, and Christian Kirk. I would take all three of those players ahead of Deebo as well. He's also still ranked ahead of Ricky Pearsall, which makes sense given the fact that Pearsall's probably not going to be the most impactful rookie, but we're still talking a first-round, pick in the NFL draft who's probably going to be the Deebo replacement in 25. So if you can trade Deebo for Ricky Pearsall and another player, a second-round pick, I think that that's very doable and something that could absolutely get done. Another player that I would be looking to offload as soon as possible given his age is Keenan Allen, who is now with the Chicago Bears, and he's got to compete with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, who this team took in the top 10 of the NFL draft. So I think that we are in for a huge drop-off because Keenan Allen is no longer the number one target in his offense. I think that is going to clearly be DJ Moore. And then Rome Odunze is going to command some targets as well, and is certainly going to be someone that this team focuses on getting the ball to, given the draft capital investment. So this is someone that I think still will have a somewhat decent year in Chicago this season in 2024, playing in that slot receiver role, but I don't think he has the same type of upside that he had with Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Now, I do think that's been reflected in his value for the most part. I think he's seen a pretty considerable drop in his value on sites like Keep Trade Cut, but I almost don't know that it's gone low enough. He is someone that I would be looking to try to move for someone like Chris Godwin, something in that range. I think they're viewed relatively similar, and I just, given his age and the fact that he now is the number, he might be the number 2 target in the offense this year. But it's possible. It's certainly in the range of outcomes that he's the number 3 target. And there's a lot of mouths to feed. He has a rookie quarterback who, even if Caleb Williams is great, we've seen over and over and over that wide receivers that have rookie quarterbacks, don't necessarily possess the same type of upside and ceiling, that receivers have with veteran quarterbacks. So I am very nervous about Keenan Allen. I thought he was somebody absolutely worth going after last season, but now that he's no longer in LA, I am out on Keenan Allen. The third receiver on this list is Deontay Johnson, who was traded this offseason to Carolina, and Carolina in the draft went out. They drafted Xavier Legette. They also got Jatavian Sanders, Jonathan Brooks, so they're kind of a whole offensive overhaul in Carolina, which is much needed. It was a just terrible offense last year, and Bryce Young still there. He's going to be in year 2. Something that I kind of view as a make or break year for Bryce Young. I was not impressed at all. I don't think many people were impressed with Bryce Young last year, and he's got the new coaching staff, and Deontay Johnson is somebody that is going to be the number 1 receiver on this team, but he's still going to have to compete with Legette, who they're going to put on the field. There's still Adam Thielen, who they paid a whole bunch of money to. He's still going to be there this year. He's going to get targets. Jonathan Mingo, he's kind of an afterthought now, but he's still there. Still a second-round pick from last year. I highly doubt they're just going to completely give up on him right away. So that's 4 receivers there that are going to get targets. They're going to demand some targets. And so while Deontay Johnson will have a role, he struggled with Pittsburgh last year. He's, a PPR type of guy. He's going to, get first downs. He's going to get open. He's not a big red zone threat, but, and I just don't know. He's getting up there in age. He's not an old man yet. He's still got 2 or 3 years left of solid production, but if you can trade Deontay Johnson straight up for Chris Godwin, I would do that. I think Godwin is a better player on a better team and a better offense, and I think they're valued very similarly. So, again, that's kind of another switch that I would make in terms of this level of wide receiver. but I'm just not that excited about him. I wouldn't, be thrilled to have him on a team. He can certainly be a solid flex player for you. I'm not trying to say that you should just give him away or that he's not going to do much for you. He's going to be the number one receiver on this team, like I mentioned. So, but again, rough quarterback play, below average quarterback play from Bryce Young. That's probably the best and nicest way that I can say it. But I'm out on Bryce Young, and so therefore I'm essentially out on pretty much all of the Carolina pass catching options. The only guy in terms of dynasty that I would be, truly interested in having on my roster is Jonathan Brooks. And if you took, Jatavian Sanders with a third or fourth round rookie pick, I think that's totally fine as well. But other than that, in terms of building my team for the future, if you're a rebuilding team, I'd be trying to trade Deontay Johnson away. And if I'm a contender, I think there are better targets out there within Deontay Johnson's range. And last but not least, we have the tight end position where there weren't a lot of tight ends that were affected by the NFL draft. There is, one very obvious player who we'll start with, and that's Michael Mayer from the Raiders. And Vegas went out, they took Brock Bowers. I think a lot of people were surprised by that. It really hurts Michael Mayer's value. I think I had just taken Michael Mayer like a week or two before the NFL draft in a startup. So I was, one of those people counting on Michael Mayer to have a good impact in year two, but I just don't really see that happening now. I think the best hope for Michael Mayer is that they use Bowers more as a big slot or a wide receiver, and they keep Mayer in that tight end role where he's able to go run routes. But I just don't know that that's going to be the case. Maybe we'll see that, but if that does not happen, I think the best case for him would be a trade. There's plenty of teams around the league that could use tight end help, and Michael Mayer he was still somebody that was a very good prospect. I mean, he was taken at the top of the second round last year, very highly thought of. I think he still has a lot of potential. He just needs to go to a team with a better quarterback situation, because that's something that even if he does see the field, there's Devontae Adams, there's Jacoby Myers, there's Brock Bowers. I mean, there's people that are going to be ahead of Michael Mayer in the pecking order in terms of targets. So all in all, just a really rough situation for him. And I think best case scenario, we see a trade this summer where he can, flourish a little bit more in an offense that will actually use him. Now, the next two players, they're both on the same team, so we'll talk about them together. But it's the Bears tight ends. It's Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, and we mentioned Keenan Allen earlier in the wide receiver section. But Cole Kmet, I think, he's a top 10 dynasty tight end, or at least that's how he's, I think in my eyes sort of been considered over the past few months. Not top 5, but somebody in that, 8, 9, 10 type of range. And he had a really good connection with Justin Fields, but he's gone. Caleb Williams is there. We don't know what kind of connection those two will have, but it probably won't be quite as good. It's certainly not right away as it was with Fields. We talked about the new weapons. There's Keenan Allen. There's Rome Odunze. There's a lot of target competition. So I think best case scenario, Cole Kmet is the clear fourth target in this offense. If somebody gets hurt at the receiver spot, he can move up to third. But again, it's hard to bake that in. And then in terms of Gerald Everett, he's Cole Kmet's backup. So he goes from a situation where he was a starting tight end, had some solid value, some decent games, especially in tight end premium leagues with Herbert and the Chargers, but you're not going to get that. He's not going to be on the field that much. He's going to be in more of a blocking role. Something would have to happen to Cole Kmet for Gerald Everett to be on the field for an extended amount of time to make him actually worth something in Dynasty. So from that standpoint, I think Gerald Everett is droppable. I've had him on a couple teams over the past couple seasons. I went ahead and dropped him after rookie drafts just because I just don't see an upside there. I don't see a way that he impacts your fantasy team at any level. And if you wanted to throw one other player in, since Gerald Everett's a little bit of a cheat to go with Cole Kmet, we could also throw Mike Gesicki in this list as well from Cincinnati. He's somebody that's had some fantasy relevance in the past. And I think he has a little bit more value right now than somebody like Gerald Everett, simply because he's probably at the top of the depth chart with the Bengals. But that's only going to be a one-year situation, and then his value will tank because I think that Eric All is probably going to take that job in 2025, and there's McLaughlin as well, tight end out of Arizona that they took later in the draft. So Mike Gesicki, a bonus guy to throw in there at tight end that I think his value is continuing to drop. And he didn't have a ton of value before, so again, we're talking about guys that may or may not actually have much of an impact on your teams, but given how the NFL draft went at tight end, where it was pretty much Brock Bowers and then Ben Sinnott and Jatavian Sanders and really nobody else, there's not a lot to touch on in terms of how the draft, impacted NFL tight ends. But those are the guys that I wanted to touch on here today. So that's going to do it for today's episode. A nice, quick, easy show today. Just wanted to touch on some players that I'm a bit wary of right now that I think, that I'm not looking to add to my teams, that I think their value has dropped, and players that you should, steer clear of in startups, and just have these thoughts in mind as you get into the off season. So hope you all again enjoyed your holiday weekend. Thank you all for tuning in. Go follow us on whatever platform you're listening to right now, and go give us a follow on Twitter as well, at Dynasty War Room. So thank you all for listening. We will talk to you all next week.